Today I'm in sunny Southern California because some car companies may have given up on sedans, but Honda sure hasn't, and for 2022 we're getting an all-new Honda Civic sedan and shortly a new Honda Civic hatchback. This video is going to be a little bit shorter than normal because I'm going to be able to drive this back home and spend a full week with it, so be sure and stay tuned for that video, and stay tuned for June 23rd because that's when I'll be able to tell you what the new Civic hatchback looks like. As you might expect out of a Honda sedan, the designers have opted for a very restrained and elegant design. Nothing funky, nothing peculiar is happening anywhere around the Civic. This looks an awful lot like the previous generation model and also a little bit like the current Accord, but you can see that they've definitely modernized things. There's no huge chrome bar running from one side to the other. Instead, there are larger body-colored sections than these black grille portions right here. This is the top-end two-ring trim, so we do have LED fog lights below. LED headlights are standard, as is the LED turn signal above. Moving around to the side, I honestly see a little bit of BMW in this design, and that's certainly not a bad thing to be reminded of when we're talking about an inexpensive sedan. The Civic starts at $21,700 and goes up to $28,300 before tax, title, license, and that pesky destination charge. So the pricing window of this vehicle is pretty darn narrow. It's only about $7,000 from the bottom to the top. Again, coming on June 23rd, we're going to get a hatchback variant of the Honda Civic, and based on the teasers that Honda has shown so far, it does look like it's going to continue to be more of a liftback like we saw in the previous generation Civic hatch. We have a short trunk lid back here, but you can see that they've definitely gone for more of a raked profile. At 184 inches exactly, this Civic is certainly on the long side of the compact sedan segment, and this is now, interestingly enough, almost exactly the same length as the 5th generation Honda Accord. Wheel designs are such a matter of personal preference, but I have to say I love Honda's latest designs. This is a 10-spoke wheel that is designed to look sort of at first glance like a 5-spoke wheel. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Out back, the restrained and elegant style continues, but we have fewer LEDs than we had up front. The backup lights and the turn signals are still incandescent in this tail lamp design. This definitely looks a lot like the previous generation Civic. They're dual exhaust tips, but they're tucked completely underneath the bumper. At least for the moment, the Civic will be offered with 2 engines under the hood, although you can logically expect an SI and a Type R to come at some point later. The base engine is a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. It produces 158 horsepower and 138 pound-feet of torque. That's pretty similar to most of the competition. Then we have this engine, which has always been a little bit different because it's been more powerful than average. This is a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine that's received a few tweaks for this model year. It produces 180 horsepower and 177 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are going to be mated only to a continuously variable automatic transmission if you choose the sedan. Honda has already announced that if you choose the hatchback, you will have the choice of a 6-speed manual transmission. If you get the 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, fuel economy will range between 33 and 35 miles per gallon depending on the options you select. The big change there is the tire size because the upper level trims definitely get wider tires like the one that I'm driving today. If you get the 1.5-liter turbo engine, then fuel economy actually goes up to 34 to 36 miles per gallon. Before I close the hood and move on, one nice touch that has remained with the Civic is that you can prop the hood up into 2 different prop locations. That makes it a lot easier to work on the engine if you plan on doing things like changing the oil yourself. Hopping inside, we have a power multi-way driver's seat with a tilt telescopic steering column, but one odd thing that I noticed immediately is that we don't have adjustable lumbar support. Bear in mind that I am driving the top-end 2-ring trim. It's pretty common to omit lumbar support in base models, but I'm surprised that Honda did that even in the top-end trim. Obviously, there is no passenger side lumbar support that's adjustable, and the power seat over there doesn't have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Jumping into the back seat, the first thing you're going to notice is the incredible amount of legroom. This is something that Honda has done very well in their sedans. I have about 5 inches of legroom sitting with this front seat very comfortably adjusted for me. At 79.7 inches of combined room, this is class leading, just barely beating out the Subaru Impreza. In fact, we find less than half an inch less legroom in here than a Toyota Camry. So fitting child seats back here is actually going to be pretty similar to some mid-size sedans. But this is still a compact sedan, so the rear bench is going to be a little bit narrower than something like the Camry or the Accord. Definitely keep that in mind. If I scoot all the way over to the right side, this front seat is almost all the way back in its tracks. I have about 2 inches of legroom left. Now, headroom, that is a little bit on the shy side. I cannot actually put my head back there to the headrest, but sitting in what I think would be a more comfortable average position as long as you're not needing to relax on a longer road trip, I have perhaps about half an inch left. Another specification that is shockingly similar to a number of mid-size sedans is the cargo capacity of the new Civic. We find 14.8 cubic feet of storage space back here behind the trunk lid. That is really close to the 15.1 that we find in the Camry. In addition to being spacious, this cargo area is pretty deep, so you can actually keep a 22-inch roller bag like this one in this position and still close and latch the trunk lid. If you're looking for even more cargo room out of your next Civic, stay tuned because the hatch is probably going to give us double the cargo capacity that we find in the sedan. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that I am in the top-end touring trim. Honda has updated the button bank right up here on the ceiling a little bit. There's a sunglasses holder right there, sliding sun visors for the driver and front passenger, a pretty standard-sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passenger's heads. No panoramic moonroof in this vehicle. We have height-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger and two-way height-adjustable headrests. This model has the available leather upholstery. We have perforations in the center seat sections of the bottom and back cushion, but these seats are not ventilated like you do find in some of the competition. They are just heated. For this generation, the interior of the Civic receives some pretty drastic changes. We see a new design direction for Honda. Moving over to the front door panels, we find some soft touch materials, like right here in the center section of the door and the very upper section of the door, but this entire trim piece right there around the door handle and that black insert is a hard plastic. The biggest design change versus other Honda models available in the US is definitely the dashboard design. We have this really intriguing honeycomb strip that runs all the way from one side of the dash to the other. You can see it right over here under that infotainment screen. It goes all the way over there to the passenger side. It contains the air vents. You can see over here on the passenger side we have that little knob to rotate and direct the air vent around, and then that dial right below to open and close the air vent. But the entire section between these two air vents, if I can finally zoom out enough, this one right over here and that one right over there, this is all just for show. Nothing actually comes out of that portion of the air vent. I have to say, I love the way this looks, but I am a tiny bit concerned. If I zoom in here, you'll notice that we actually have another piece of plastic right there behind the honeycomb, and I just wonder how difficult that is going to be to clean as the vehicle gets a little bit older. On the other hand, I'm really glad that Honda thought outside the box and gave this a bit of a retro Audi 5000 vibe. Below that, we have a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dashboard, we have two different infotainment systems depending on the version of the Civic that you get. This is the larger of the two Civic infotainment systems. As you can see, the system supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It also supports wireless Apple CarPlay, which is a nice touch. It has a factory navigation system, and an interesting touch is that if you're using Apple Maps for navigation, like I was just showing right there over here in the CarPlay, then you'll get turn-by-turn navigation directions in the instrument cluster. Working our way down the dash, we again have those honeycomb air vents there, the controls for the optional dual-zone automatic climate control, heated seats only, no ventilated seats. This portion of the dash looks an awful lot like the Honda Accord. Below that, we have two USB ports. Only one is an input for the system, the other one is a charge-only port. There's a Qi wireless charging mat, but not quite enough room to stash some of those larger smartphones if a USB cable is connected to them. If that was just in the wireless charging mat and you were using wireless CarPlay, that would probably be just fine. We have a pretty traditional console shifter, drive all the way back there. Park is just forward. There's a drive mode selector back here that allows us to choose between normal, sport, and econ. It's an auto start, stop, disable button, two large cup holders there, electric parking brake, and auto brake hold. There are two different instrument clusters depending on the trim level that you get. There's a base 7-inch display, and then there is this display, which is just over 10 inches. One really nice touch again is that the navigation instruction coming out right here on the instrument cluster is actually being pulled from Apple CarPlay. So if you prefer to use CarPlay to navigate, it will pull instructions from there, but only if you use Apple Maps, not Waze. There are two basic layouts. This is the bar layout. There's also a more traditional gauge style layout right like that. And then there are variations around that. So you can get a round minimal or a bar minimal that basically just deletes one of the gauges on the side. So if I choose this one, for instance, you notice gauges will be hidden when cruise control is active. This side is customizable as well. So for instance, I can turn off the audio and clock display. So if I turn that off right there, you'll notice that it goes blank. And then I can use this to scroll through my input still. The steering wheel is Honda's latest design. It's a 3-spoke design with a split bottom spoke, paddle shifters on the back, infotainment controls over here on the left side of the wheel, controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on the right side. There's a lane centering button, and then these two dials control the different sides of that multifunction LCD cluster. So far, my entire time has been spent down here in Southern California on roads like the one that I'm driving on here, long, straight runs, so not a lot of mountain driving. However, I have been able to give this a preliminary 0 to 60 number, and I think it's going to be pretty similar to what I get at home because I usually do my testing at sea level, and as you can see on the camera, the sea is over there on that side of the vehicle. So basically the same conditions as I usually test. This particular vehicle went 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds and then stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 115 feet. Like other Civic models that have come before, Honda has really focused not just on handling precision and handling feel, but also absolute grip. So that means this is a little bit different than something like the Mazda 3. The Mazda 3 has great steering feel. I think it is a little bit better than the Civic, but the Civic has better grip because it has a more elegant suspension design, has a fully independent rear suspension rather than the twist beam axle that we find in the Mazda 3. And this has wider tires. You'll find 235 width tires in the upper end trims of the Civic. And that's one of the reasons that the stopping distance in this vehicle is shorter than average for the compact sedan segment. But Honda also has a really elegantly designed suspension. Now, this is not the next level in Honda suspension design, the new double wishbone suspensions that we find in the Acura lineup or in previous generations of the Honda Accord, but it is still really well tuned, and it's definitely more engaging than the average compact sedan. This is certainly more fun to drive than something like the Toyota Corolla, and significantly faster. That's another thing you'll really notice out on the road. In terms of handling ability, I won't have an official score until I can get this at home, but it's easy to see this is going to be among the best handling of the compact sedan group. And if you want to take things to the next level, stay tuned, because there are going to be more powerful versions, just not necessarily for the 2022 calendar year. Honda has not exactly given us a rollout schedule for the Civic, but they've dropped some pretty broad hints that the Civic Si is coming back and that the Type R is probably coming back as well. They've also dropped some hints that they will not get automated manual transmissions. So if you've been hoping for a DCT or something like that in your next generation performance Honda Civic, then you may be a little bit disappointed. It does not appear that that is going to happen. But for this model year, they have updated all the safety systems. So we get adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, their excellent lane centering system, lane keeping, road departure mitigation, etc., all standard. And finally, blind spot monitoring is available rather than the Honda Lane Watch system. So no buttons on these turn signal stalks. You simply look in the side view mirror. There's a blind spot monitor readout there, just like you find in most new vehicles in North America. As you'd expect out of a non-performance oriented Civic, I think they've done a good job balancing handling priorities and ride quality. This has a moderately firm ride, but it's not too far removed from what we see in the Toyota Corolla. The difference, I think, is that the suspension system in the Civic is just a little bit more polished, a little bit better controlled than what we find in the Toyota. As far as fuel economy goes, your fuel economy will obviously vary based on the driving that you're doing. So far, I've been averaging 28 miles per gallon. That is well below the EPA score, but I've been doing a lot of city driving. A stop at a stoplight right here. This vehicle does have auto brake hold, which is a nice touch, and it has engine start stop, so obviously it's going to save you a little bit of fuel in city driving, but not as much as moving into a hybrid model. So if you want a hybrid, that would be the Insight. We don't know what the future holds for the Insight just yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it was another retweaked version of the Civic. The current generation Insight is basically the Civic hybrid with some different styling. That is likely what we'll see for the next model unless they decide to roll it back in the Civic lineup. Unfortunately, no greater visibility at that at this time. At least for the moment, bottom lining the Civic is pretty easy. This is certainly an easy to live with compact sedan that definitely feels a bit more grown up than it has in the past. Even though sedan sales aren't exactly on an upwards trajectory, I'm really glad that Honda decided to give the Civic another chance rather than doing what Ford has done and just canceled all of their sedans in North America. Honda is certainly doubling down on sedans, and it makes sense because with everybody else leaving, sales of the Civic have been relatively healthy, including sales of the Civic hatchback, which again is going to be completely redesigned on June 23rd, so be sure and come back for that. But unfortunately, the realities of sedan life just cannot be ignored, and that's why Honda really focused on the core values of the Civic. It's fun to drive, it's well priced, and has a lot of feature content on it. But if you want some of the more luxurious features in your compact sedan that some shoppers may be after, you'll have to look somewhere else, because we don't find the full LED tail lamps back here. We don't find adjustable lumbar support. And there are a few things about the interior that feel a little bit less premium than some of the competition, but the price tag of this Civic is hard to ignore. This one tops out under $29,000, obviously before destination tax, title, and license, but that's a really narrow pricing window. From the bottom to the top, it's under $7,000 of pricing difference, and you can get your hands on a base Civic, which is still really well equipped, probably better equipped than most Honda Accords were 20 years ago, for about $21,000. Now at this point, I'm going to stop my video here because I do have to get out on the road. I'm going to be driving this 400 miles back home. I will then spend a week with it and then do a complete review. So be sure and stay tuned for that one. In that video, I'll be diving deep into pricing and comparisons and talk about exactly what kind of features you get for your dollar on the new Honda Civic. So in the meantime, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. Come back for the Honda Civic hatchback first look, and of course, the full review of the Civic coming up over the next few weeks. I'll see all of you later.